In our daily research exercise, looking for information that informs what we do at hotspotting.com.au, we often come across articles that encapsulate all the problems that create misinformation for Australian consumers. The article will take a strongly negative stance even when the data on which it's based is positive. The headline will be a screaming negative, which often doesn't even reflect the content of the article. So often the headline's the problem, not the content. The authors are very often the usual suspects. The same journalists keep popping up as the ones who relentlessly write negative articles about the Australian property market. Nothing positive is happening out there apparently. And the other big problem is that they generalise and talk about the Australian property market and what's happening with prices across Australia, when in effect what they're really talking about is Sydney and extrapolating that into some kind of national crisis. So a couple of examples just in the last few days. I'm looking here at an article which says home loan arrears at highest point since 1996. Now that sounds quite serious. Now people are having trouble paying the home loans. Highest level since 1996. It must be a bit of a problem. The headline certainly infers that it is. Then I look at the byline, the person who's written the article is Clancy Yates from the Fairfax Empire, who published newspapers like The Age in Melbourne and the Sydney Morning Herald. So often the author of articles about real estate that are supremely negative and quite often plain rubbish. And here's another one. So when you actually dig down into the content of the article, you'll find actually there's a very, very positive story here. According to the figures they're quoting, they're from Standard & Poor's, who regularly publish information about home loan arrears. Is that the proportion of home loans that are in arrears, that's without 90 days behind with their repayments, is 0.5% of the total, so well under 1% of loans, which means that 99.25% of people out there with mortgages are paying on time. And I would have thought that's a pretty positive outcome. 99.25% don't have a problem. But they've turned it into a screaming negative for the headline that suggests we've got a really serious situation. This is talking about the situation in December. It's slightly higher than November. It's risen from 0.73% to 0.75%. So an increase of 0.02% is, according to our friend Clancy and the relentlessly negative Fairfax newspapers, we've got a serious situation. But when you read in the article, the Standard & Poor's credit analyst Erin Kitchen is quoted in the article, notes that the proportion of home loans that in arrears is still rather low. And that's basically what the story should be about, that despite all the negativity out there, despite the difficulty that appears to be the case in getting home loans, stronger, more stringent standards by the major lenders, we still have a very strong position where more than 99% of mortgages are being paid on time. And then we further note that the key reason why there's been a slight rise in the delinquencies is basically in two states, Western Australia and regional Queensland, the areas where we had a mining boom, then a bust, and property markets rose a lot and then fell. And those are the areas primarily that have a problem with mortgage delinquencies, and it's sort of bumped up the national average a bit, but still well below 1%. So was it even worth a story? Was it worthy of this headline? Absolutely not. Just another case of media finding a screaming negative and a sea of positive statistics, I would have thought. Here's another one. Further falls in house prices will hit the economy, says Reserve Bank. Actually, when you read the article, they're not actually saying that. That's the headline, which again, so often the headline is a lie compared to what's actually in the article. One of the usual suspects, again, a guy called Shane Ryder, again, a writer for the supremely negative Fairfax newspapers, And Shane has never in his life written anything uplifting or positive about a property market. He'll only write something when he can see a screaming negative to latch onto, which he does with undisguised glee, and here he's done it again. Allegedly, the Reserve Bank's concerned about falls in Australian house prices. Well, the Reserve Bank's smart enough to know we don't have a fall in Australian house prices. We have Sydney prices down. How much depends on whose figures you believe. Melbourne to a lesser extent, again, it depends on whose figures you believe, but certainly not across the country. And the notion that there's going to be economic fallout from the fact that prices are correcting primarily in Sydney, I think is one of the great furphies that's out there at the moment. What we're being asked to believe is that because house prices have come down a bit from Sydney, they've risen for 5 years, and now they're correcting, and according to some figures, it's a pretty mild correction. Other figures, it's more serious, but still, relative to how much prices have previously written, it's not a serious situation. It's, when I look back through historical data, it's kind of a normal correction in Sydney. But what we've been asked to believe is that because prices in Sydney has fallen, everyone in Australia is going to feel reluctant to spend any money in the supermarket and in shops generally, and I just think it's absolute rubbish. The reality remains that the vast majority of Australians are living in areas where prices aren't falling. Most Australians are living in areas where prices are holding firm or are rising, and in some cases rising strongly. People living in property markets where prices are falling a lot are very much in the minority. So why would that create a national situation where people are no longer spending? And I think the Reserve Bank should know better than to even comment on this sort of nonsense. But in actual fact, what they did say in the minutes from their most recent meeting, in which Shane Ryder's latched onto and done a bit of a beat up, as he always does, the Reserve Bank minutes said that the impact of the property market slump to date, and he's referring to Sydney primarily, but he's turned it into a national thing. The Reserve Bank minutes said the impact would be relatively small. However, members observed that if prices fell much further, consumption could weaken. Yeah, so he's taken that, the usual fairly cautious language that an organisation like the Reserve Bank would put in their minutes, and he's turned it into a negative headline, as he always does. There's really no substance in the story at all, just like there was no substance in the previous article I referred to, which talks about a serious situation with home loan arrears, when the figures actually show that we've got a really strong position. Those figures, plus other information that shows the vast majority of Australians with mortgages are ahead on their repayments, and the average situation is a couple of years ahead. People have paid extra, taking advantage of low interest rates, so most people are well ahead on their repayments. We have a very comfortable situation. We might have high levels of debt, but we've also got high levels of asset values, and we've got a situation where most people are well ahead on their loan repayments, and less than 1% are struggling to make their repayments on time. Serious situation? It's quite the opposite. It's a really strong situation. Just shows how strong the economy is and how comfortable the average Australian is with the current situation relative to their repayment of the mortgage. So we can always rely on the media to take a really strong and positive situation and turn it into a screaming negative headline. That's what they do. I think some of them need to get help from a medical health professional. That's it for now. Terry Ryder from Hotspotting signing off. Let's do it again same time next week. Bye for now.